welcome to the CHGO Chicago Sports Podcast presented by PointsBet. Use promo code CHGO when you sign up to get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. It's ladies' night at 1 p.m., right? I have my all-female CHGO Chicago Sports Podcast panel with me today, and I'm so honored and thrilled to be here with all of you ladies. I am here with the CHGO Skies, Janice, Subria, and from CHGO Red Stars, our newest podcast, Claire. Thank you all for joining me today, ladies. How are we feeling?
Feeling pretty dang good today. The sun is shining. We're talking about being women in sports. Yes. I'm pretty pumped.
You're quiet over there, Subria.
Listen, these last few WNBA nights and games have been really late, and my teams have been taking a lot of L's. So
yeah.
Last night was a rough one. There was an NWSL game that was I think a 9 p.m. Central kickoff. At the same time, the Sky were tipping off at 9 p.m. And so, yeah, it was like, oh my God, it's Wednesday and we're really doing this.
I know. Well, I appreciate you guys coming on. I know both teams are coming off a loss. So let's talk a little bit about the state of the teams right now. What's been going on? How are we feeling about your season so far?
So far, it's been a mixed bag. I definitely do have some concerns about depth, but the fourth quarter rally that the Sky attempted yesterday was at least good to see. I think this is definitely a much different team when Kalia Copper comes back. So even though last night was pretty disappointing, I remain cautiously optimistic.
Do you share the same feelings, Subria? Are you?
I'm not really too worried. Honestly, a lot of teams are a mess right now. Like, they've just been all kind of embarrassingly bad for the most part, with the exception of like maybe a team or two. But yeah, like she said, Ka's not here. So, she's finally back in America, gonna do her physical, and when she passes, she'll be back with the team. And then I'll be able to say, okay, this is the real team, the real test, and a true reflection of what we're going to do this year.
Right.
Yeah, the Red Stars are in a similar situation. They've had a lot of absences, some of which are permanent for this season, and that just kind of is what it is. You have to adjust expectations after something like that happens. For the Sky, they had one bad quarter. They had a really bad quarter, and then they did better. So, I watched a little bit of that game. I thought that they pulled it out. But, so for Red Stars, still working through a lot of things kind of off the field in terms of getting players back on the field. We found out today that Morgan Gautrat is going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks, which is really unfortunate for how they want to play in their midfield. But getting Mallory Pugh back in the mix, they've got 2 strikers coming in from out of market. So I'm hopeful that, they've been competitive in pretty much every game they've played. It's more just about how can you get over the line,
right,
and turn that into a result.
Sure. So I wanted to ask you guys how you felt so far about your time here at CHGO, because we have a podcast for each Chicago sports team now. How has that been for all of you in this moment where it's like, okay, now we have equal coverage of all teams? I think that was such a void that was here in Chicago, and I think we as women are being trailblazers in that way for the Sky, for the Red Stars, for these teams that don't have as much coverage historically.
Absolutely. First of all, definitely the expansion of coverage, especially for the Chicago Sky, has been very nice to see, and I'm really glad that CHGO is passing that on and definitely extending that range to a wider audience. Before we came onto the scene, there were still plenty of great writers, great reporters covering the team. Again, shout outs to James Kay from the Tribune, Annie Costabel from the Sun-Times, Chris Pennant, who is half of the Skyhook podcast. There's been so many great content creators in the WNBA. So essentially, one of my personal goals was to just kind of extend that audience and kind of pull in a lot of my baseball followers and kind of get them hyped about the WNBA, because it's so very exciting. It's incredibly exciting. And as a new fan, I just fell in love with this team this past year, and I just want to share that enthusiasm and love for the game with everyone else. So.
Amazing. Subria, but you've been a fan of the W for a while. You've been around this game. Talk about how it was to come on to the CHGO Sky podcast and continue what you've already built basically on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I started covering the Sky in like 2010, 2011. And then it was back for a print magazine, and there were like some online articles. So very different back then, especially being a more new team at the time. So to kind of have gone and done those types of like the written content and interviews that I was doing, covering the games in person, and then really going to college and coming back to a new, I guess, team. I mean, with changes in ownership and everything, and to now like have been provided the opportunity after really dedicating myself back to the W and being able to experience the championship last year. It was super fun.
Yeah.
Very like a true full circle thing,
Yes.
honestly. So I'm really happy to be here. It's like one of those things where I try to not necessarily like pivot or just like leave the W or just women's sports coverage behind, but I thought I was going to be doing something different, and then the universe was like, nope, come back. And so I'm just really happy to be here.
I love it. And Claire, you're kind of in a similar boat here. You already had Southside Trap and you know, kind of merged that with what you're doing here with CHGO Red Stars. So much of us are self-made. Can you talk a little bit about how you knew to start this, you saw this need, and now it's turned into something bigger than maybe you would have imagined?
Yeah, I mean, I started as a fan, really, which is, I think, how a lot of what you would call like the new media, especially in women's sports, get into it. Women's sports writing, especially, like Subria was saying a number of years ago, just the barrier to entry was very low. You know, just get a URL, write a blog, you know, send an email to the team, be like, hey, can I talk to this player? They're like, yes, absolutely. You know?
Yeah.
And so it was something that I was interested in because I was a fan and I saw that there were gaps in coverage. Speaking specifically to Red Stars coverage, one thing with the NWSL, and I think this happens with the WNBA quite a lot as well, is there's an expectation of a lot of national or general league coverage. So you have writers who are doing power rankings, who are talking about all of the teams, doing little bites on every single team. And that's great. But where the infrastructure really does not exist in the NWSL is on the local level. And so there are very few outlets that approach coverage from like the city in which the teams are based. And I think there's the papers, I think, cover WNBA a little bit more than they do because with soccer, it's also a soccer problem as much as a women's soccer problem. But it's growing. The sport's growing. But yeah, so always, even as I do my own national coverage of women's soccer and women's sports, have always wanted to keep that Chicago part alive because it is so important. And just quite frankly, they're the team that I know the most about.
Right.
So it would be a waste to pull away from that. And so being able to join CHGO and kind of build that infrastructure up on a local level is really great.
That's awesome. I feel, honored and blessed to be working with all of you and learning from all of you. It's so great. But with that said, what do you think the state of women's sports is in Chicago, and how can it become better? And it's okay to have criticism here. I mean, like, where is it? How are we feeling about it? And how can it improve?
Yeah, there's already been a culture that's been imbued for like quite a while now. And I think just the outreach portion, we're all definitely working on. And I know like Subria is doing a lot of work in just extending outreach and growing the game in that sense. But it could always be better. And I mean, just even in some earlier interviews that I've had with players about improving the league. And I think as the league improves, as conditions for players improve, then of course, yeah, so will coverage, so will say the state of the game as well. But I really am excited because Chicago is just a great sports town in general, and just even the fact that the four of us are sitting here and talking about it is evidence that, yeah, there certainly is a market for women's sports in Chicago. There are people who love women's sports in Chicago,
right.
And and that's just going to get better.
And it's like you were saying earlier about your love for baseball too. We don't just love women's sports. Like we also can appreciate and watch and love men's sports as well. So I've seen your coverage on the White Sox, and you're always at the top of my list when you're tweeting about the Sox. So I love it. But Subria, what have you seen here with women's sports in Chicago, and how can it become better?
I mean, it's interesting to hear Janice say that there's a culture, because I don't actually think there is. And what I mean by that is like two parts. One, I think the Sky are just now becoming accessible, and I don't think the Red Stars are as accessible, because when I don't have a memory of anybody in the world introducing me to the Red Stars or to the Sky. And I'm somebody, I played soccer from first grade for like up until like I graduated college. And I remember just only recently finding out about the Red Stars, because I had to beg my mom, as someone who's from Chicago, has always lived on the South Side, I had to beg my mom to take me all the way to Toyota Park, where it was at the time, for even see the Fire. So the same thing with the Sky. I just stumbled upon them one day on my television, and I'm like, why has no one ever told me about this? Like, what is this? And they were all the way at Allstate, and my mom's like, no. So it was like really hard to get there. And so now that, you know, social media makes things more in your face, I guess. But I think like the Sky, for example, because Chicago is so segregated, I think there's an issue of maybe prioritizing audiences that might not necessarily be in the best interest of the organization. And so now that they're more south and in a central location, I still think that there's a disconnect for going into certain neighborhoods, even though it's kind of like right there. And so I think that a lot of times Sky games aren't actually a true reflection of Chicago culture, and it's more so kind of what I think maybe ownership wants it to be, and that doesn't work compared to other markets like in the W. The biggest ones are like Phoenix and Seattle. I don't know what there is to do in Seattle. I have no clue what there is to do in Phoenix, but there's a lot to do in Chicago. And so I think maybe that's a reflection of the audience that gets brought into the arena, but they're not really going into the places where I think it should be, because you go to Bears games, you go to Bulls games all the way out west, and you see the people, and I don't think it's really gotten there yet for the Red Stars or the Sky.
Do you think, quick follow-up on that, do you think that the Sky had to win a WNBA championship to even be close to the level of respect that they've received?
Yes, and I say that because and I know, like, again, there's a line of criticism, and I'm not trying to say it to be disrespectful. I'm saying it to be honest, and as someone who has been there. And I think as a fan, I honestly think it's a blessing to be a fan in the sport that I'm covering, because I think that misses a lot. And if you're not a fan, you can't really speak to the growth, or at least like the perspective of a fan. So as a fan, I'm saying that the games are not fun unless they're winning. And I mean, like, I've gone to Sox games, I've enjoyed them. Probably can't even tell you who won the last Sox game I went to. Bulls games, I don't know every game we won, but it was fun. And I don't think that's there, because again, it's not a true reflection of Chicago culture. It's very maybe like not specific to Chicago. It's just kind of like, well, you're supposed to have these chants and these TikTok videos, but it doesn't translate to who we are in Chicago. And maybe if it was more Chicago, people would come just on some Chicago stuff, just because that's part of what is in Chicago, whether we're win or lose. And then people would continue to go. But I think that's kind of part of the disconnect of, well, where else are people going to go for if we're not winning? Because it's just not fun.
Right. Claire, do you feel like the Red Stars have that problem, and did you have to discover them?
I'm like, my neck's going to start hurting, because I'm like nodding so vigorously. Literally everything you said is so true. Well, with the Red Stars, it's worse. I mean, everything you said about the Sky. And the thing is, you know, we all saw, I mean, when the Sky went on that run last year in the postseason, it hit a level of awareness that I had never seen before. You're wearing a Sky shirt, and someone like a guy, I was walking to like game 3 or game 4, walking to the green line, and the guy was like sweeping his porch, and he was like, I hope they win. And I was like, me too, man. And so like you get that level of people knowing that it's happening. The Red Stars have been in 3 championship games. They have been on the pinnacle of that 3 times and have never reached that level of understanding or awareness. Part of it is the venue issue. They do not play in the city. That is a thing that is not going away. Obviously, the Fire at Soldier Field now, that's going okay. You know, they're building that facility up in like Belmont Craig and up near like Hermosa, and they are they're talking about maybe moving some stuff over there. I think that would be great. But yeah, with the Red Stars, there are a lot of challenges to getting people out to games. And then I think this is also something you guys can agree with, which is if the game day experience has things that could be better, the stream experience is worse. And so if you're not getting the TV support or the streaming support, then what interaction are people having with the games? They're either not being able to go, or they are going, and yeah, it's only really fun if the team is winning, or the team doesn't always do a good job of telling its own story, and learning from losses and all of that sort of stuff. And then if you can't even go to the games, you are scrambling to find a stream on Facebook, Twitter. For soccer, it's Paramount Plus, it's Twitch. There's a lack of investment in those streams, and so if you were a casual fan, and again, this is just being frank with it because I think everybody involved wants to do better. I have a very limited number of games that I even recommend people watch on TV, because even the soccer games that make it onto big CBS are not produced by CBS,
Right.
And so I have to be very strategic with that, because you could turn somebody off immediately if they don't have a good streaming experience. And so I think that is there culture? A little bit, and I don't want to discount the people who are there, because there are some really big fans of both teams who have been here for a very long time. But I do want to get to the point where people are watching even when they lose and have things to say about a loss and understand where the team is going. Because I think with Chicago sports, famously, you can get kind of as much conversation out of teams losing as you can them winning. And I think that's where I would love to be. I would love for there to be well, I don't really want them to be bad, but I would love for that to not, I would love for their success economically to not be predicated on winning games.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that also is present on social media too. I'm on social media. I'm working in social media here. I think it was in 2019. I think the Mystics won the WNBA championship. I think it was that year. It was the year that, the Nationals won the World Series.
Yeah, it was.
And I think a bunch of Washington teams have
the Capitals, I think, won the Stanley
Capitals,
Cup.
That's exactly
around
it.
that time too. Yeah,
and I don't know if it was ESPN or one of the big, sports media conglomerates they did like a post, and it was like City of Champions, and nowhere on that graphic was the Washington Mystics.
Oh yeah,
and a bunch of Mystics players were like, "What the hell? This is unacceptable."
Right?
Like how it's right in front of your face. So I think that's definitely present on social too. We'll pause for a fun ad read. A little transition. The best way to support CHGO is to download the PointsBet app and use code CHGO when you sign up. If you do that right now, you'll get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. That's not all, though. If you make a $50 or more first-time deposit, you'll receive a free CHGO membership, which unlocks all of our web content. You'll even get a free shirt of your choice from the CHGO locker. We have such an awesome CHGO Sky and CHGO Red Stars shirt on our website, on our Instagram. Check them out. They're awesome. But again, that's $2,000 in risk-free bets and a free membership and a free t-shirt from the CHGO locker, all for making more than a $50 first-time deposit at PointsBet. If you have any questions, you can email us at pointsbet@allchgo.com, and we'll help you out. Your home for live in-play betting just got even better. There's also a new feature, the live NBA same-game parlay. For the first time ever, you can build the first live NBA same-game parlay for only with PointsBet. You can combine your favorite bets anytime during the game. If you want more, you can also boost your live same-game parlays. Watch live, parlay live, and boost live with PointsBet. And now online sign-up is available in Illinois. You can download the PointsBet app right now and register your account from start to finish, all from your phone. So what are you waiting for? Once the game starts, don't just bet. Live your bet life with PointsBet. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. All right, ladies. We're hanging out here, CHGO, Chicago Sports Podcast, with an all-female crew. I want to know, growing up, I'm assuming all three of you loved sports. So what woman or women in sports did you look up to?
Oh man, that is a really excellent question. So even though I've been a sports fan since I was very small, I grew up on the southwest side of Chicago. My mom is from the Philippines and has always been into basketball, so always had some sort of sports game on. So I always had something to say too, but the thing is though, I felt so incredibly far removed from the conversation, and also too, like as, you know, an Asian American woman, as a young Asian American woman, I felt as if what I had to say just had no place in the greater conversation. And even though I went to college, so I actually went to DePaul, which the great shirt that Subria is wearing, I actually did go to a couple of basketball teams and I had things to say. But I mean, did I ever say, go up to the DePaulia and say, hey, I want to cover this team? No, I didn't, because I lacked confidence. I really didn't think that, I didn't think that anyone was interested in what I had to say. So I kept it all to myself. And it wasn't until I got into social media where I discovered a community of people who look like me that talk about sports. And I always think, like, say, if there was someone who looked like me, like years ago, would I have jumped in the industry much sooner? Probably. It definitely took a lot of finding confidence within myself to, I guess, be the person I needed when I was growing up. So yeah, I'm going to do a little time travel and say, yeah, that I am the woman in sports that I.
That's such a good answer.
That is a good
I'm
answer.
inspired.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Subria, what about you?
Yeah, same. Before she got to the end, I was like, well, I don't want to sound rude, but it was nobody and it was me. Like, I didn't have anyone in real life, but I will say that there was a show, I don't know if you all are familiar with it, called The Game. And it was essentially about football. And I never necessarily was a football fan, but there was a character on there who's played by Wendy Raquel Robinson by the name Tasha Mack. And in the show, she's a sports agent, and just through her character, you can see that she's clearly, like, always the only woman in the room, the only Black woman in the room. And I knew from a young age that I wanted to be in sports, and I liked managing things because I always feel like I'm always right and I have the best ideas. So naturally I was like, oh, I would love to be a sports agent. So at that age, probably had no business watching the game necessarily at that age, but I was like, I want to be a sports agent. I want to be like Tasha Mack. So whenever someone would ask my dad, like, oh, what does Subria want to do? And I was working for sports teams and I knew I wanted to go to law school, and he would just always tell people she wants to be like Tasha Mack. And to this day, I am so happy the game came back. I'm so happy to be serving as a sports agent right now. So I will just give my hats off to whoever wrote Tasha Mack.
I love it. Both of you just like saw something and were like, I'm going to become that. Claire, I'm sure you have a similar story.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine's a little bit more boring, which is that, and this is true, I think, for a lot of people in the space, is it kind of begins and ends with the U.S. Women's National Team, right? And in all of the different iterations of the team. So, you know, I guess I was like 7 when the 99ers won. And I remember I grew up in rural Ohio, actually, and I know people complain about how much the U.S. goes to Columbus, but it was really important for me as a kid.
Yeah, I saw your 614 number. I'm from Ohio.
I know, yeah, 614, baby, that's right. And that's even like when we moved to the big city. But yeah, so I got to see. I remember. I think the one time I got to see them live was I think the 2003 2004 like Olympic tour that they did, and that was that last round with like Brandi Chastain and Mia Hamm and Janice Scurio and just falling in and out. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I was just I idolized those players. And then getting back into it as a young adult, it came back in 2015. You know, it's like you go from when I was in college, I really actually wasn't focused on sports at all. I was a music major, so I was doing something like totally different. And then yeah, so it's always just like, for a while, I think like a lot of people, every 4 years I would check back in with the U.S. Women's National Team, but it wasn't until 2015 that I was like, oh, there's a league as well.
Yes.
Right.
Same.
So yeah, so I think that has to be it for me. And I think that, I mean, they are they are the lifeblood of the sport in this country, 100%.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm kind of like you. I started in something different. I was in news and I wanted to be like an anchor lady. And then I realized how depressing news can be at so many points. And I had a news director that told me like I probably would never be on TV or on the media because I didn't have a good voice or I didn't have this or that. And I was like, okay, we'll see. We'll see. And then, I switched to sports because I grew up watching my dad enjoy sports, my brother play college sports. And I said, I'm going to do this instead. It still applies that news or journalism background, but it's in a way that I think is a lot more fun. So love it. What led you all here? I know it's the podcast, but like, when did you know, like, all right, this sounds like the right opportunity for me to advance in my career, keep covering the teams that I love, and like, when was it a yes moment for you?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I guess to give you some background, when I interviewed, that was one of the first questions I asked. CHGO was like, say, what are your plans to cover women's sports? So I said, I see that, in the other markets that you're in, you're covering all these teams, but Chicago has a little bit more of a wide breadth of sports teams. As the Sky just literally won a championship. What's happening there? So I asked, and they said that, that's a great idea, and we should definitely implement something like that. And yeah, if you would be willing to take the reins on a Sky show, like we would definitely be willing to set you up with that. And I said, wow, okay, well, I definitely did not get any questioning. It was definitely just something that was like, yeah, we should absolutely do that.
Sure.
There's a huge market for it. I personally was like, okay, I could also like cover White Sox too. I could also jump on pretty much any sport, like general Chicago sports podcasts, because if you ask me for my opinion, I'll give it to you.
Right.
So that essentially is what led me here. And even though like I'm new to covering basketball, I've watched it for years. I'm definitely just not going to pretend I'm some like lifelong industry expert, but there are plenty of people like me who are kind of looking at the league and looking at the sport with fresh eyes. And so my whole thing is maybe like as I'm learning, as I'm processing things, as I'm learning things, other people can kind of join me on this journey. And so far, it's been tons of fun. So and I've met so many awesome people in the process. So 3 of them are sitting amongst me as well. I guess Joey's also included in that as well.
Joey's awesome as well. Yeah. Our producer Joey, shout out.
But yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Cool.
Yeah, it was like an immediate yes for me. Like, I don't even think there was a phone call involved. It was just an email or maybe even a Twitter DM, and I'm like, yes. And then as soon as I got on the phone with Jake, was like, yep. Because like I kind of said before, to me, being a fan is important. Even if you're like just starting out like Janice, or you've been covering it as long as I have, I think a lot of coverage that I see for the W come from people who don't necessarily want to cover it, but they're doing it because people are like, well, why aren't you covering it? Or where are the articles? And so when I hear or read articles, or I hear them, say things, I'm like, no, that's not true. And I know that you're not watching games, because maybe you think this 6'8" person in the W is supposed to be, like a big presence in the paint and getting rebounds, but in reality, if you watch the game, you know that they're not.
Right.
And so I think it comes from somebody who wants to love the game outside of just the work of covering it, and someone that's paying attention because that's what they want to do.
Yes.
So I was happy to be able to provide that because I think it's more genuine, but also it just results in better coverage. So instantly I was just like, yep, sign me up.
I love that.
Yeah, for me, it was all about infrastructure. So, I freelance with other publications, and I'm so desperate for structure sometimes, because when you're truly doing it yourself, and that's what Sandra Herrera and I have been doing for a number of years, and she's the one person missing from this conversation. But we were doing it ourselves through SB Nation, and that was like almost completely uncompensated, and so it was all self-generated work. And then for a number of years we were on Patreon, which was amazing. Like, we owe our patrons so much. We started a Patreon in January of 2020, and then they like stuck with us for the whole year.
Wow, through the pandemic.
Through the pandemic, that's right. And so, but again, self-generated. So when you have an editor say, hey, where's this piece? Or, hey, what are you working on? That's great, because then you're like, oh, I really need to get that done.
Yes.
And if you're fully self-generating the work on the local level, maybe you don't make it to the press conference. Maybe you're late with that piece. Maybe, you get done recording the podcast, but you can't actually produce it and get it up for another 24 hours. Right. And so it starts to feel like it's slipping through the cracks. And so for Sandra and I, it was really important to sort of rejuvenate what we were doing within an infrastructure that felt professional and made sense.
I love it.
And so that's why we jumped on here.
Yeah, I have similar feelings about that too, because coming from a freelance background.
Yeah.
And, I also think it's so important to not only be supported by other women in sports, but the men and maybe people in general that are supportive. I think it's great that we work with a company and guys at our company that our male coworkers are supportive, they're fun, they're respectful, they're easy to work with. But with that said, it's not always easy elsewhere. So what has been, in your opinion, the most challenging thing that you've faced as a woman in sports?
Oh my God, where do I begin?
There's so many things.
I think what I definitely notice is that especially just being on social media as a woman, I feel as if I definitely am not granted enough leniency to be silly sometimes.
Oh, for sure. We're under such a bigger microscope. I think that's what it is. It's a bigger microscope.
And so, what I mean by that is, like outside of work, I am a silly person. I have a sense of humor. I love to joke around. I think sports in general can be very funny, especially if you look at them from an incredibly absurd lens. For example, I'm a White Sox fan. The way I've been coping with the way that they've been playing lately is like purely through a lens of humor. It's absolutely absurd that, and the huge argument right now is that, no one is hitting right now. So as a result, say, is this because, Jerry isn't opening his pocketbook? So is there just like a lack of inspiration coming from inside the clubhouse? And you could speculate that about that all day long, but from an outside perspective, as someone who is technically an outsider, it's absolutely hilarious.
Right.
And then I'll make jokes about it. And then there will be at least several people, usually men in my mentions, either trying to correct me or, just completely missing the joke altogether. Sure. Or I think the worst offense is when I post a joke and someone tries to be funnier than me. No, that's not possible. You cannot be funnier than me.
Nope.
So please do not try. I think a lot of the times, especially, when I talk about even things like advanced stats or even advanced metrics too, for the most part, it's gotten a lot better, but there's always going to be someone who is, has never heard of me before. And, I'm not trying to build myself up as some sort of, just mega expert that knows absolutely everything about the universe of sports. Right. But it's just sort of just do not question my, my qualifications or experience just because, I'm a woman of color, someone who lacks a check mark. And I've even seen it from other women too, which I think is also strange too. So I guess the most recent example is I covered Lucas Giolito's no-hitter in 2020. And this woman was questioning the fact that I was there. She's like, what, were you a member of the grounds crew? Or do you work for the team? And I'm like, no, I was a credentialed reporter. Right. So it's just why would you think that I wouldn't be there? Mm-hmm. And then she stopped talking to me. So
shut her up real quick.
Anyway, that is just a small sample of some of the weird things I've come across in my time working in sports. So.
Subria, what about you?
I think probably just with recent events, just probably on Twitter and probably in real life. I think my biggest thing is people trying to humble women and especially Black women, and it's really annoying because I'm someone who I do the work. Before I even open my mouth, people will tell you I'm a person that I will always do my research. Even if we're in an argument, I'll be like, hold on, and I'll just fact check myself before I even say something because I'm very conscious. And this is probably because, of being a woman.
We feel we have to be.
You have to really be twice as good for half of what, other people get. And so there are a lot of men who are around and they're mostly in positions above me. But then when I look at our resume, it's like not even a competition. Like I've done the work, I've done the internships, I've done the jobs, I have the credentials, I've done the academic programs. And I feel like every time, not only am I already working as hard to prove myself, it's like now I have to work even harder to prove it to you and saying like, here's the work, but also like I'm fighting for something. And it's just tiring. It's annoying. It's super like disheartening. And it's just something that I wish that I just didn't have to go through.
Right.
So that's probably my biggest thing.
I think we can all relate to that, and we all wish that was not a thing. Claire, what has been the most challenging experience for you?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too heavy with it, but I mean, if I'm going to be honest about what the hardest thing has been, is in the last year, there has been a reckoning within not just women's soccer, but a lot of women's sports about emotional and frankly sexual abuse. And the NWSL went through a horrible year last year with coaches being let go or being moved into different positions and teams kind of lying about why. Players had to take things into their own hands and boycott a night of games because they were also just emotionally spent by what was going on. Hit here in Chicago. Chicago head coach Rory Dames had a number of really horrible pieces come out about him in the Washington Post, and that's a person that I spoke to twice weekly, you know? And so, I mean, like, there were points where, like, Sandra and I, we would, like, hop on a call and we would just be like, okay, we're not recording. We're just going to, like, cry.
Right.
And then try to go from there, because you do feel the need to stay, because the answer is not turning your back on these women, but it's really hard to be in it with them.
Yeah.
And so that brings up a lot of inner emotions in people too, whatever you're bringing, whatever things from your past or your present situation. And so you're like trying to take care of yourself while also keeping an eye on a space that is triggering, you know, kind of weekly. And so that was really hard. And it's taken a lot of processing and sort of setting boundaries and trying to figure out ways to kind of take care of yourself while continuing to move forward. Because I mean, my perspective is a little bit different in that I've never worked in men's sports. I've always come from a women's sports perspective, which means that some things are better. People argue with me on Twitter less because they're here to talk about women's sports and they're not trying to, you know, Twitter's Twitter, but that community has builds itself if you stand pretty firm and like, this is not a space that's trying to cater to anybody. But it also just comes with like every day you're trying to just prove the worth of the thing that you're working in. And so I think that is also a difficulty as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all faced that. Thank you all for sharing that. I know that's not easy to talk about sometimes, but it's important to talk about, and we need to keep talking about it. And even if people say, you know, we're annoying or whatever, they want to come in our mentions, come on. Sabria, what?
No,
She
don't
said,
leave
"Come
me
at
alone. Don't.
Claire
don't
said,
come
leave
into
me
my
alone.
mentions.
Sabria says,
oh no, I'll pull up. I got time.
right.
Yeah, anyone who's ever interacted with me on Twitter should definitely know better by now.
Same.
I welcome any and all comments in my mentions, but yeah, just beware. That's all I gotta say.
We're here for it. Speaking of a little bit of competition there, if you want to start your day with a competitive edge, Strava CBD coffee, such a game changer. It has helped thousands of people to improve their overall wellness and quality of life. Strava delivers delicious, fresh roasted specialty coffee infused with organic broad spectrum CBD. CBD from hemp doesn't make you high or hungry, but it does offer real benefits that can help you. You'll feel alert and focused without the jitters. You'll live your day more balanced with less anxiety and fewer aches and pains. Plus, including CBD in your daily routine can even help you enjoy more restful sleep so you wake up feeling your best. The best part, Strava is all about quality. Everything is small batch, fresh, and shipped straight to your door. Strava also offers concentrated full spectrum CBD tinctures. I was excited to say that word. tinctures for those looking to have a more traditional CBD format with a powerful entourage effect of benefits. Chicago CHGO listeners can save 25% off their entire purchase when you use the code CHGO25. 25% off your order at StravaCraftCoffee.com when you use the code CHGO25 at checkout. The discount coupon is valid on non-subscription purchases only, one per customer, please. And if you already love Strava, subscribe and save with Strava Coffee Club. With Strava Coffee, you're in control. Save on your favorite coffees and have them automatically delivered to your home, office, on your preferred schedule. Very nice. All right, we will wrap up with a few more questions. Again, if you're just joining us, our Chicago Sports Podcast with an all-women crew. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening, we're glad you're here. Thank you so much for, people are thanking us for sharing our truth and being honest about the hardships. You all rock. Thank you. I love it. Appreciate the candor and transparency. Thank you guys. Great show. Watching from South Africa. We have some great listeners. Love you guys. Thank you. Brenda. Hi, Brenda. We like Brenda. All right. Last couple questions I want to ask you guys is, what do you think, in one word, we talked about this a little bit, but one word, what is the biggest barrier in driving the visibility of women's sports in Chicago or nationally? One word.
Just one?
I know, right? Or it could be like 2 words.
Dang, so many words to choose from. I'm going to go with probably the biggest one, and that's probably going to be revenue, funding, money. The driving force behind everything, unfortunately.
Right. Sabria?
I don't know. That's so hard.
I got one. If you wanna
we
wait.
can skip Sabria. Yeah. Claire, go ahead.
Solidarity. I think without true solidarity, and that means maybe giving up a little bit of what you got to give time to something else. Like, that's what true solidarity is. And I think that when we talk about revenues and stuff like that, I'm like, great, we can make that argument all day, but where's the true solidarity between the entire space,
Right.
I was gonna say self-interest, so now I don't feel bad for that answer.
No, you're right.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
Self-interest. I love it. I was going to say money as well.
Yeah.
I think that's just the biggest thing that we can.
That's a misconception, though.
Yeah.
You do?
It's suppressed. The revenue's suppressed.
And the reason why I say that is because a lot of people are always in the comments, especially with the W, and just, the NBA subsidizes the W and blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, first of all, when is the last time Major League Soccer teams have made real money? Let's start there. And so when you look at the NBA and the WNBA only being 25 years in, like, what was the NBA doing? And clearly that was people saying, we didn't make any money, but men's sports, let's just keep putting money and money and money. And then with women's sports, it's like, what do you mean you didn't give me a return on investment in 1 year when I gave you the barest of minimums? How dare you pull the plug? And it's just like, okay, like, just be real and say it's just because it's women's sports. I don't think it's really money. I really don't, because people put money into things that they like all the time. Like, me, as someone who does grow the game for free, using my own money, so like to not get paying with my time and my money, there are companies who, if you don't just write that off or something, like, we're just not in the same league for you to be complaining about your monetary losses when the people who are really holding it down don't have nearly as much as you and are giving way more than you. So I think the money thing is just a lie.
I respect that. I've covered women's pro softball for a while. The Chicago Bandits were a team here in Chicago that kind of gave me my start here in sports media and broadcasting. And in COVID, they didn't have the funding to stay alive, and it was no longer. And now we have this great league called Athletes Unlimited.
Love athletes.
Yeah, AU is the best.
Women's softball, there's basketball, there's lacrosse, and there's what am I missing?
You said lacrosse, basketball, volleyball.
Oh, volleyball. I didn't say volleyball, and softball. And they're incredible. And they do put the funding and the money into it. And they do give these athletes a chance to make the rules, make the choices, and donate to a charity of their fund or a cause that they care about. A portion of their salary goes to that. Like, it matches that. So you're right. I've seen kind of both ways where, if it can be supportive, something great like Athletes Unlimited came in and stepped up in its place. And I love the way that we've seen that grow. Speaking of growth, last question for you all. Where do you see women in sports, or just women's sports 10 years from now?
Oh my!
Where do you hope to see it?
On a much larger stage, just as commonly found and easily searchable as men's sports. I think probably this is probably going to come off as superficial, but I think merch is probably the first place my mind goes to. Like, especially if you look on like Fanatics, you have to like go to another drop down menu just to find WNBA merch. And yeah, I would love to see, you know, just accessibility to WNBA merch and products just alongside NBA products, and have it be as normal to walk into a store and be able to like, grab a Sky hat or a shirt off a shelf. So that is like where I would like to see it.
I love that.
There's a much bigger community, and yeah, I guess I mean it all starts here, right? Yeah, and it all just grows more from here.
Yeah, I would like to see them be just the teams, the leagues, everyone involved to just be more self-aware and honest about themselves. And what I mean is, like, stop, like, realize as women's sports, you're not in the same category or anything with men's sports. Like, just stop comparing yourself because, like, obviously we know from history, like, separate but equal is not a thing. Like, I wish in this case it was, because I don't necessarily want to hear about men and everything with women's sports the same way there are people very adamant who support men's sports who don't want to hear women's. But you know, just because men use Fanatics doesn't mean women's sports need to use Fanatics, because it's clear that Fanatics does not care about women's sports. So don't take those partnerships or sponsorships or deals that the men have and use it as your own goalpost, because when you do that, you're ignoring the other companies who actually want to help and will show you that. Because what's the point of having these big name deal sponsors like Nike if they're just like, no, I know you need jerseys, but too bad.
Right.
Like, just be more honest, be real. And the last thing about that is, you know, women's sports love to attach themselves again to names. So instead of grabbing this CEO or this chief operating officer from this other big company who probably has no idea what your league is doing, nothing, like no background in women's sports, promote from within. Recognize the people who are doing the work, who know what is going on, who actually want to see the company succeed, and then maybe we will actually succeed.
The people that have been there.
Yes.
Love it.
Yeah, I mean, barring like outside forces, which we all know can affect many things in the next 10 years. But yeah, I mean, I have a couple of things. Thing number one is, just to start, is that I'm incredibly bullish on women's sports. Like, get in now, like brands, media companies, invest now, because it's one of the only sports properties that is seeing consistent year-to-year growth, and it has so much farther to go. And you can get in on the ground level now. You do not have to spend that much money to be at the forefront of what I truly believe is one of the greatest, you know, rising sectors in sports and in media consumption. That being said, 100% agree with Subria. And maybe to take it a step further is, I think, going back to what you said at the very beginning of the show, which is that we need women's sports to not just be for one type of person. And so at this moment, especially in the United States, soccer is really, really bad about this. You have to be in a certain tax bracket to be able to really participate in the sport at an elite level. Yes. And then those are the families that these professional teams are targeting to become fans. And so there's no way to truly grow it in a healthy way unless you are making the sport for everybody. And that's one thing that's always stuck with me when I was a kid, and this was actually about classical music rather than sports, but it was like, you're not just cultivating the next generation of players, you are cultivating the next generation of fans. Yes. And if you are not you talk about not seeing people who represent you, whether and it doesn't always have to be just on the field, but it's about that outreach. It's about truly building from the ground up a community of people who really care about this and will care even if the teams are not very good. And so that has to come with like checking your biases, not chasing the money always, right, and just making sure that you are getting as many people who represent the city that you've got the badge on of, and having them come out to games. And so my true utopia for women's sports is that there is this opportunity, like you said, to create something new. We don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past.
No.
And so I think that that is truly what I want past it growing, because I actually think that's a foregone conclusion for me personally. I do the Just Women's Sports newsletter, and I'm like listing all of these just incredible things that are happening monthly, and attendances, TV ratings, and that's again with a low level of investment. But let's create something new and better, and that is actually inclusive for everybody, instead of just sort of recreating women's sports in the image of what's come before.
Sure. Thank you all so much for joining me today on the CHGO Sports Podcast. Claire, Janice, Subria, you guys, this has been such a powerful and important conversation. I know we say that all the time, but it really is. So thank you again. Thank you to Kevin Kaduk for letting me host today. He'll be back next week. But for now, we will see you guys next time on the CHGO Sports Podcast.